Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Independent Dollar. If you're joining us for the first time, we make new videos every week on personal finance topics in a way that is straightforward and easy to understand. Today we're going to be diving a little deeper into TFSAs. In particular, what happens when the owner of a tax-free savings account passes away. If you've ever wondered, how does a tax-free savings account get taxed at death? What happens to your tax-free savings account when you die? Or what is the difference between a beneficiary and a successor? Then this video is for you. Here are the areas that we'll be focusing on. First, what is the difference between a beneficiary and a successor? What are the TFSA beneficiary rules when you've named both a successor and a beneficiary on your TFSA? The dangers of naming a beneficiary on your TFSA, especially when you have a will. How does a tax-free savings account get taxed at death? Why it isn't always tax-free, and examples of when your beneficiaries pay taxes on a TFSA. How do tax-free savings accounts work when you name your spouse as a beneficiary instead of naming them as a successor? The tax consequences, and is there anything that they can do at that point? Since its inception back in 2009, the tax-free savings account has become a staple in our retirement and investment strategies. After all, it feels as though we pay so much in taxes that why wouldn't we take a break when we can get it? If you just turned 18 this year, your limit for 2020 is $6,000. For those of us that were 18 years of age or older in 2009, your limit now looks quite different, sitting at $69,500. Now, we're not going to go into the details of TFSA limits today or how the account works. But if you haven't already, I would strongly suggest starting with those videos first so you can see some basic examples as well as some common misconceptions about the account so you can avoid any unexpected penalties from CRA. As your investments grow, it's important to know that you have control over what happens to your assets when you die. We often think of a will when we think of ways to determine who will inherit our belongings, whether it be our homes, our investments, bank accounts, or maybe even tangible, sentimental items that mean so much to us. But what happens if you die without a will in Canada? Nominating beneficiaries can be an easy and quick way to designate your assets to someone should you pass away. They have both beneficial and, as we will see later in this video, sometimes negative consequences if they aren't used properly. So how do beneficiaries work, and how does a tax-free savings account get taxed at death? Well, that depends on how you've nominated your beneficiaries or a successor, if any. You've probably heard the term successor and beneficiary used interchangeably, but what is the difference between a beneficiary and a successor? If you always thought that the two designations were the same, let me start by being very clear. They're not. This is a common misconception that only shows its face during the worst of times, when a loved one passes away and they're left with the unintended taxable consequences. Let's start with the beneficiary designation. Your TFSA allows you to nominate one or more individuals to receive the proceeds of your account upon your death. Simply put, if you die, they inherit the money. Any investments within the TFSA are sold and paid to the people that you've listed on the account, which can be anyone from a spouse to a cousin to a friend, for example. Afterwards, your TFSA is then closed. A common question is, can a TFSA be transferred to a beneficiary? If, as a beneficiary, you would like to deposit the amount that you received into your own TFSA, you can do so, providing that you have enough contribution room to deposit the amount that you inherited. However, you cannot transfer the account into your own name. A successor holder, on the other hand, can only be your spouse, whether through marriage or living common law. When a spouse passes away, their living spouse is referred to as their survivor. Listing your spouse as a successor on the account is much different than listing them as a beneficiary. It essentially transfers ownership of the account to the surviving spouse immediately upon death. Simply put, their name is now replaced on the account without having to sell any of the investments within the TFSA. They can then either continue to hold the account separately as is, or they can transfer the entire balance into their own TFSA, tax-free without triggering any taxable event. And this is true regardless of their current TFSA limit. Therefore, assuming both you and your spouse were both at your maximum limits for your TFSAs, and one of you were to unfortunately pass, the other would be able to take over your tax-free savings account without impacting their individual contribution limit, nor would it trigger any type of taxable event. This is very different from the beneficiary designation, where the assets are sold, removed from the account, and then the account is closed. Should the beneficiary wish to hold those investments inside of their own TFSA, then they would have to make a deposit into their own account, providing that they have sufficient TFSA room. Now, exceptions do exist when the survivor is listed as a beneficiary instead of a successor. But even then, there are limitations, and they do not receive the same privileges as a successor designation. Stick around as we will discuss this a little later in the video when we show you what happens when a spouse dies, but they've named their husband or wife as a beneficiary instead of a successor. What are the TFSA beneficiary rules when you list both a successor and a beneficiary on your tax-free savings account? You may not be aware, but it is possible to list both a successor and a beneficiary on your tax-free savings account. The successor designation, though, takes precedence over the beneficiary designation. Therefore, if you listed your spouse as a successor, but you also named your children or friends as beneficiaries, the successor designation trumps all of them, and 100% of the account will be paid to the successor. However, in most cases, individuals still tend to use both designations. Why would they do this? So that in the event the successor is passed, the funds will then be directed to the surviving beneficiaries and bypass probate. This is commonly seen with parents nominating their spouse as successors and then their children as beneficiaries. As we will see shortly in this video, beneficiary designations bypass the will. In Ontario, as well as some other provinces, with the exception of Quebec, wills go through a process in Canada called probate. Probate essentially verifies the authenticity of a will and confirms the most recent wishes of the deceased by ensuring it is a most recent copy of the will. While you may not think that your state requires probate, ultimately, it's not up to us. In fact, many banks in Canada require proof of probate before they're willing to release any funds to an executor or a beneficiary. If your estate is under $50,000, there are no estate taxes during probate. However, estates over that amount are charged 1.5% on the entire estate, and that includes everything from bank accounts to investments to your home. Naming a beneficiary on your tax-free savings account, though, causes it to bypass the will, and therefore the estate and estate taxes. For a full list of estate tax fees based on your province, you can visit our website, theindependentdollar.com. What happens if you die and you have a will, but you've also named a beneficiary on your tax-free savings account? Naming a beneficiary on a registered account, like a TFSA, now removes the TFSA from your estate because a beneficiary designation causes a TFSA to bypass the will. Meaning, regardless of what is written in your will, whomever you've nominated on your TFSA will inherit the account. This is important to understand because sometimes throughout our lives, we make changes to our wills as the individuals we once wished to inherit our assets are no longer the same people we would like to pass things down to. For that reason, it's important to review your designations on all of your accounts on an annual basis, so your nominations are always up to date and in line with your current wishes. A common occurrence of this is a change in spouse or significant other. If your intention is to leave your TFSA to your spouse or children, it would cause unintended consequences if you left an outdated beneficiary on the account to whom you no longer wish to leave your investments to. As an example, let's assume that you had an ex-girlfriend named Samantha who was listed as the beneficiary on your account. You and your ex had a falling out a few years ago and you haven't spoken to each other since. Over that time, you had a will drawn up though and listed your brother Tom in the will as the beneficiary of your estate. Unfortunately, the TFSA is no longer part of your estate because a beneficiary is designated on the account, so it bypasses what's listed in your will. Therefore, Samantha is entitled to receive the entire amount within your TFSA. Your brother Tom, whom you've named in your will, will receive nothing from your tax-free savings account. If you die, what are the TFSA beneficiary rules? Do your beneficiaries receive the assets from your TFSA tax-free? Well, that depends. Any income earned within the account while you were still alive will be considered tax-free. After you pass away, however, any income earned within the account, unless it's being passed to a successor, will be considered taxable. So think of the TFSA as now acting similar to a non-registered account after your date of death. Any income earned will now be added to the income of your beneficiaries. Continuing off of our previous example, let's assume that the value of your TFSA when you passed away was $10,000. By the time your TFSA was cashed out and paid to Samantha, the value had grown to $10,500. Samantha will receive $10,000 tax-free, and the difference of $500 will be added to her taxable income. Assuming she has sufficient contribution room available in her own TFSA, she can now choose to deposit the $10,500 into her own account. How the income will be taxed for Samantha will depend on the type of investments held within your TFSA. You can learn more about how income and investments are taxed in Canada by watching our video about this, which will include a link in the description below. How does a tax-free savings account work if your spouse passes away but lists you as their beneficiary instead of listing you as a successor? As a spouse, married or common law, you are also referred to as a survivor and are entitled to some benefits when inheriting assets from your spouse. If you are named as a beneficiary on the TFSA, you do have some options. Now, in contrast to other beneficiaries, you have the ability to transfer the fair market value of the TFSA as of the date of death tax-free into your own account and not impact your contribution room. Any amount in excess of that fair market value at death, however, will unfortunately be considered taxable income for you. This is the main difference between being named a successor instead of a beneficiary. Because as a successor, all amounts within the account would have been transferred to you in your name tax-free, even amounts earned after death. As a beneficiary, how do you make that tax-free deposit into your own TFSA? Well, first you deposit the money into your account just like any other deposit. But once you've done that, you then need to complete and submit Form RC-240, Designation of an Exempt Contribution Tax-Free Savings Account, and submit that form to CRA. And this must be done within 30 days of that deposit. Here's what the form looks like, and we'll include a link in the description below. Hopefully this video has answered some of your questions that you might have had surrounding TFSAs during a difficult time when a loved one passes away. As always, comment below with any questions that you might have, and feel free to let us know if there are any other topics that you'd like to learn a little bit more about. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you back here next week.